Truckers of Reddit, have you ever gotten spooked or creeped out while parking overnight somewhere? If so, what happened? It mostly replies from non-truckers. I'm trucker, based in Canada, was crossing border through Detroit, got pulled in for inspection, flashing police lights, megaphone instructions, police escort, had a load of tubes, pictured pipes of some kind. Turns out it was a load of old cathode ray picture tubes for recycling. They give off faint radiation and trip the sensors. Spent 4 hours in a cinder block room without my phone or passport. Finally released. Almost out of hours of service. Pulled into the first truck stop I could find. They told me they charge $10 to park there. This is almost unheard of. Most truck stops want you there because you're going to spend money. They explained it was because it was a gated yard with a security guard watching your ass overnight against the rampant crime in the area. Detroit also rolled past Gary, Indiana, which is infamous for murdering truck drivers. Glad to be Canada only now. My father-in-law is a trucker in Australia. He told me a story of one night, in the middle of outback. Not a soul in sight and hundreds of kms between towns. Australia is huge, especially on the west coast where we are. Pitch black night, a tire blows out. He pulls the shoulder and starts the task of changing. Feeling uneasy, he keeps looking over his shoulders. Something isn't right. Working fast, telling himself to stop being a scared cat. Then, all of a sudden a hand lands on his shoulder. Hey there mate, you have a spare smoke? An Aboriginal man has wandered up to him like it was a normal thing. In the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, he says, no mate, I don't smoke. So the man just walks away into the darkness. He reckons he aged about 20 years at night. Have a trucker story from the extended family. An uncle used to drive a lot and he always came back with the most weirdest stories ever. While every family member knew his stories, there was one story he told and warned about, even to me when I was 6 or so. Moral of the story is to never stay during night in the desert alone. It seems, once he drove to Chile, he had a contract and the way there was okay. I made the travel myself later in life. It's beautiful. Whenever he was done he usually spent a few bucks on booze. But this time, due to a family gathering, he wanted to come back as soon as possible. So instead of drinking in some bar, he decided to sleep a bit at the Atacama Desert. Well, it's a desert. And he had parked way outside the road in a few miles before the next village. He sleeps and wakes up on someone singing. He is confused and thinks it's the radio, but the radio is not on. Then the singing stops and it sounds more like a scream of help. That's when he wants to get out and help. But still he is confused. He said he started the motor and the lights to see where and who was there. He also did open the window a bit and yelled asking what happened. It was nothing. And right then, when he decides to get out anyway, he catches a movement in the corner of where the lights end. It looked like a woman, but the face was pitch dark. He freaks out and drives away, non-stop until he reached home. Whatever he saw or thought he saw, every time he told the story his face went pale. Even my grandmother commented how he was usually a very jolly guy, but whatever happened in the Atacama Desert freaked him totally out. I used to haul salt water off of well sites in Oklahoma on the night shift. I was standing at the rear of my trailer as I was loading out in BFE somewhere when I heard gravel crunching like someone was walking towards me. Got that feeling where you feel you're being watched. Stepped around the trailer towards the sound and shined my flashlight at a cow licking the side of my trailer. Pulled over for a break on the way to Melbourne from Sydney at a truck stop. No street lights or anything. Pitch black. No other trucks or cars at the stop. I turn off my lights. I switch the truck off. Do the curtains. Lock the truck from both sides. Jump into bed. Set my alarm and set my phone above me in the compartment. I was rolling over from side to side for around 5-10 minutes. I couldn't get to sleep due to it being prime summer temperatures, reaching around 30 degrees at night. I'm looking up at the ceiling mentally planning out the day ahead. Suddenly the passenger side door opens up slightly. Cabin light turns on. What the duck? Now, the truck is fairly a late model and in pristine condition, so there's no question about door being faulty or anything. I just sat there for what felt like eternity expecting someone to come up and see me sitting there with a solid rod in my hand that we use for tightening belts. No one came up. Nor was there any noise at all. Just quiet. Eerie silence. I grabbed my torch and jumped down. Walked around the truck. No other trucks were around. Nor were there any cars. It was just me and my fully loaded B-double. After around 5-10 minutes of getting ducked around with, I locked up and went to bed again. Woke up next morning, yawned, fixed myself up along with the bed, opened the curtains, and FML there's a cemetery next to the stop where I parked. Hunger and laziness all escaped upon realization. Grabbed keys, duck putting shoes on, duck putting pants on, switched truck on and just got the duck out of there ASAP. NSFW. Not a trucker but worked with lots. Worst story I heard was a guy who parked up in a lay-by for a few hours sleep. Was awoken by banging on the cab. So came up front and opened the curtains to see a guy stood in front. As soon as the guy saw him he got his D out and started wanking in front of the cab. He didn't stop until the driver got out of the cab and literally chased him off. Thinking he might come back, the driver moved his truck a few miles down the road and went back to sleep. Only to be woken up by the same guy doing the same thing a few hours later. Phoned the police the second time and the guy got in a car and drove off. Back when my dad was a truck driver he stopped to sleep in a lot one night. The guy he leased his truck from happened to see him parked there, and in the morning when my dad went to the restroom this guy used a spare key and hid in the sleeper. Once my dad was on starting to leave, the guy reached out and grabbed him. My dad said he freaked out so he just bailed out of the truck. It was moving around 5 miles per hour. I'm a female so I get creeped out a ton. I drive at night because I think it's more peaceful and my husband drives during the day. I avoid rest stops like the plague because they always seem the creepiest. I also listen to forensic files on the radio while driving and it fuels my paranoia. One night when I had first started driving I stopped at a rest stop instead of a well-lit truck stop just to use the bathroom and stretch my legs. I heard on the news a week later that a middle-aged woman had been kidnapped from a rest stop in Arizona and they hadn't found her yet. I had just been in Arizona a few days prior. I may not have been at the same one but it still makes me feel vulnerable. I carry mace everywhere I go now. Like most people here, this didn't happen to me. One of my good friends from middle school had a stepfather who was a truck driver for a good amount of time. He was a tough son of a bitch. I never saw him not look like he could kill someone. Except one time, when he told us why he stopped driving trucks. He was on a long trip from somewhere down in Texas to Boise, Idaho. By the time he hit the freeway close to Boise he had already been up for 24 hours. Either way, I don't believe he could have seen this coming. Outside of Boise he was driving late at night at the fastest legal speed when out of nowhere he sees someone sit straight up in the middle of the road. He didn't have enough time to even hit the brakes. Not that it would have helped. She was decapitated on the spot. He later found out she was tweaked out. I don't think even if he wasn't sleep deprived he would have seen her lying in the road. From what the police could gather, she walked out there, sat down and eventually fell asleep in the road. No one knows who she was or how she got that far out. I used to drive truck in northern Manitoba. There's a road in the northeast you can drive for several hours and see very few vehicles. This road is quite flat and straight and stretches. Of course, this is deep in the bush. One day I saw something cross the road in the distance. Very large. Easily past the hood on my truck. But not long. Like a moose or elk. Just tall. It disappeared into the bush and as I drove by the spot the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I heard days later a tow truck driver describing on the radio his encounter with a similar creature. Only he was much more clear he had spotted Bigfoot. This guy went to some length to explain he didn't want people thinking he was crazy, but he was sure what he saw. I asked an Aboriginal client of mine in a nearby community and he said the elders spoke of them as commonly the same way they spoke of the other animals. I don't know what I saw that day but I'm certain it wasn't a bear, moose, deer or elk. I just don't know what the hell it was. Nothing huge, but I once was stopped by a train in Calumet City, Isle. Probably 2 or 3 AM and it's a kind of the ghetto area. So I was a little uneasy being there at that time. The company I was delivering to was at a dead end just after the tracks. Of course there wasn't anyone around. Just me. I sat parked for like 5 minutes waiting on the train and all of a sudden I heard loud knocking on my door. Like rapidly to get my attention. I have a day cab so I looked all around the truck through the windows and mirrors. Nobody. The road was wide enough that I would have totally seen someone run away after doing it. I'm sure it was something not on this plane and I accept that. I'm sure people had been killed in that area at some point in the past. Not a trucker, but was making the drive to my new university from halfway across the country. It's dark and I'm driving through pitch black forested rural areas. But my destination is only another 2 hours away, so I'm going for it. I'm tired, but determined. Maybe a little too weary to still be on the road when it's so dark. Then, as I'm making my way up the slow curve of a hill, I see 4 bright blue lights glaring in the distance through the trees, hovering maybe 5 feet off the ground. But it's too dark to tell how far they are away from me. I'm freaking out. I don't know if I should slow down or speed the duck up, but either way I'm getting closer and closer. It only takes about 30 seconds for me to round the curve in the road, but it felt like forever. My blood has run cold and my mind is racing because I watch way too many stupid UFO conspiracy documentaries. Finally I can tell where the lights are in relation to me. I'll be directly passing them soon and I swear I'd never been so on edge before. If my hands weren't so tightly gripped around the wheel they'd be shaking. Christmas lights. They were 4 plastic stars with blue lights in the center, having been hung up on a few trees. As I was breathing a sigh of relief and regaining my composure, I passed the farmhouse they most likely belonged to. Duck that. One time in the middle of the workday I got this ungodly painful migraine. So I pull off at a truck stop with my load, shut my curtains, and take a nap. I was asleep for maybe an hour and a half, but I woke up because I had the most vivid ducking dream of me waking up in my sleeper and continuing my day. In my dream I remember I was still loaded and coming down a hill when a 4-wheeler slammed on their brakes. I locked mine up and swerved left, which you should never do. I went into the bar ditch and rolled my rig. About that point in my dream I woke up drenched in sweat and was completely mind ducked. I was really hesitant to get back in the driver's seat and finish my day. One of my trucker friends has a story about spending the night alone in a rural stop in the middle of a Maine winter. She had a bit of an uneasy feeling about the place but couldn't put her finger on anything and needed badly to rest. So she stayed. Perfect Stephen King setup, right? She's usually a very solid sleeper, but wakes up around 3 AM that night. She's not quite sure what woke her up, until she notices that the cab is very slowly and gently rocking side to side. She can also hear an intermittent, soft sort of rubbing sound that corresponds with the rocking. She was a seasoned trucker already at this point, but really wasn't sure what this was, and all the ideas that came to mind ranged from the mundane but alarmingly unsavory to the outright paranormal. Terrified, she creeps up to look in the side view mirror to see what's out there. Turns out some moose like to lick the road salt off of semi-trucks. After reading through a majority of the comments on this thread, my curiosity was piqued and I called my mom up to ask her if my great-grandfather, a trucker during the 60s, had ever told her a creepy story of being on the road. To my surprise, she said there was one story he told her as a cautionary tale. It's not about parking overnight somewhere, but I thought it might fit in here just the same. He said he was driving through somewhere pretty rural, a small town with a few houses here and there. As he was making his way down the road, he saw a large cardboard box tumble down a hill and come to a stop pretty much directly in his path on the road. It was too late for him to brake. But why would he? It's just a cardboard box. It's not like it would hurt his truck if he ran over it. So he kept chugging forward. At nearly the last second, he said something came over him and he immediately swerved to the right to avoid hitting the box. When he looked in his rearview mirror, he saw 2 little kids scramble out of the box and back up the hill. It's amazing what little kids in a small town will do for fun. I still feel sick to my stomach after hearing my mom tell that story. Not a trucker, but I've slept in 100s of rest areas, parking lots, state and national forests. The spookiest times are things you can't put your finger on, often in the desert. I was outside of Roswell. The colors of the land and night sky just felt strange. Everything has this purple hue. Gave me chills. Not a trucker but road trip story. Here, I went deep south, South Carolina to visit my cousins a few years back. After 6 hours on boring 95, we decided to go to a bar which they all called the Swamp Joint. It is, at this point, Just an old shed with beer allegedly owned by a black magic prone. Native American. Is also supposed to be 120 years old. But that's another story. In a hoe we go. Get blasted. I gather my 9 cousins to leave. When we get outside of this shed on the riverbank, none of our 4 cars will start. Okay, maybe we all left our lights on. We were deep woods and all had our highs on. We asked for a jump a few times. Everyone says no. Very apologetically, they advise asking why is Jonna, the magic Cherokee, owner of said bar. We keep trying. Finally ask him. He says he'll help but doesn't leave his little room in the bar shed thing. After sitting and waiting, the ground vibrates and we see a glow on the overgrown grass. Wild dogs show up and surround us. We are all silently freaking out but frozen with fear. After about 15 minutes Jonna emerges and says try your wheels. Now, all cars start. We haul ass to south of the border. My cousin refuses to tell me where we were. Take me back. Acknowledge anything strange occurred or that night. I have so many questions. A couple years ago I was sleeping in my van in North Hollywood after getting off of work. I had the seats folded down and a long plywood plank with a mattress on top of them. So I was elevated at windows level, but they were tinted. Woke up late one night and was startled by a guy standing outside staring into the van and talking to himself. I realized he wasn't trying to look in, but was looking at his reflection. I don't know how long he had been there but he was there for another 15 minutes until he staggered off. Only once, in a truck stop in LA, I looped one of my 4 wide ratchet straps through the door handles on my truck and snugged it up so nobody could get in even if they broke the windows. Once the sun was up the next morning it was all good, and I went on my way. Not me but my dad saw a fuel plant explosion while driving his truck late in the night early morning. He said you could feel the heat from the explosion pass through the cab as it happened. The explosion also caused the cab to shake. He was half asleep while driving so I'm sure that woke him up. I believe this was the plant that exploded. Good topic idea. Hope you get replies. I love creepy stories. Nothing too creepy but I've parked in a few less than desirable places. The first was next to Pange in Kansas City on the edge of the ghetto. Nothing happened but it was still freaky at the time because I was fairly new. Yes, I've had a couple bums lot lizards knock on my truck but if you stay quiet they just move on. I've heard random bumps in the night but never really worried about it. I heard a story about a police officer in Chicago or NY making a trucker move his truck so he didn't have to deal with a homicide in the morning. Very early in my career, within the first 6 months, I spent the night in Detroit, parked outside of my delivery point waiting for my appointment time. This was a common enough thing that lot lizards frequented the area. Guy in the truck next to mine tried to not pay and got shot by the pimp running the girls. Dude, I get spooked just by passing a mirror and catching a glimpse of my own reflection. I feel that this might need a serious tag. All the time. The worst might have been an incident that happened a while back in Indiana. I was just parked for a 34-hour reset. Means you can't drive for 34 hours so you can get a full 70 hours of driving back. It's the hours of service that allows us to drive and count our hours, just outside of Chicago. Now for all you non-truck drivers, right out of Chicago in Indiana is probably the first place you learn about not stopping if you can. Drug dealers, lot lizards, prostitutes, theft, the whole 9. I didn't have a choice. I had nothing left at all for hours. So I sat. That night I heard someone messing with my truck in the back. I sat in my truck while I heard this continue for 2 hours. I would much rather deal with it in the morning than go out to see what's going on and getting robbed at weapon point. Woke up the following morning to see my 5th wheel handle pulled. Means if I drove I would have unintentionally dropped my trailer I had attached, and my glad hands. The lines that connect my truck to my trailer that provide me with braking capabilities, completely missing. Worst of all, they undid my freaking catwalk like savages and ran off with it. My brother was a truck driver in the 90s early 2000s. He just told me this story a few months ago. He was driving through Pennsylvania on way back to NJ. He pulled over the side of the road behind 2 other trailers. In the early morning, he heard someone bang on his right door. He quickly jumps from the sleeping compartment and grabs his bat. As he looks out the window, There's no one there, but now there's a bang on the left side. Freaked out, he looks out that window and there's nothing but silence now. He's trying to figure out WTF is going on. Seconds later, banging on both doors simultaneously. He said the banging was so loud and heavy the truck was shaking. Both curtains open. He can see there's no one out there. He quickly jumps in the driver's seat and starts the truck. He sees the other 2 trucks ahead of him do the same. He said he felt as if they all had experienced the same thing. This is more of a creepy than funny thing. I was driving in a team truck and I would drive the night shift. It was about 1 AM and I was listening to Art Bell on Sirius XM. Now I am the biggest skeptic on the planet, but I also love a good spooky story, so I always enjoyed listening to his show during the short time he was on there. I am rolling along on I-40. No traffic. Everything going smooth and these guys on the radio are talking about taking digital recorders to cemeteries and recording voices of the dead. A lot of the voices were supposed to be children begging for help. It was seriously creeping me out. All of a sudden the biggest ducking skunk I have ever seen appears in my headlights. I screamed like a little girl. I hit it. Can't swerve the truck for animals, because you can roll the rig too easily. My co-driver was woken up by the scream and came out of the sleeper to see what had happened. Then the smell hit. I had the AC on just fan with outside air because it was cool out and that skunk odor filled the cab. We had to pull over to the shoulder and get out to get fresh air. That truck smelled like a skunk for weeks. 17-year trucker. Never had anything happen while sleeping. Had lots of it happen while driving. My granddad was a truck driver in Korea when he was in the army post World War II. Every night driving down a supply road a certain tree would bang on his roof. He got sick of it, so stopped the truck to climb up and cut the hanging branches. He shone the torch up all on his own on a dark road, and it was legs. Traitors were hung there apparently. He only drove the route at night so didn't see. I slept in my rig on Walton's Mountain in VA one night. It wasn't the pitch black darkness that bothered me, it was the sounds coming from it. It wasn't animal noises. I have no idea what it was, but it creeps me out to this day. I was delivering to a location in Ferguson, Missouri during the previous riot. The owner of the facility said it was safe to stay at, but after the first rock hit my truck, I moved 20 miles down the interstate to a truck stop instead.